Hello and welcome back to the channel. On today's tutorial, I'm going to be sharing with you how to draft and sew an underbust corset gown with a mermaid skirt. So if it's your first time viewing my channel, please hit on the subscribe button. Let's dive right into today's video. So the first thing I'm going to do is to go ahead to mark out all the measurements. So I'll mark the shoulder to bust, shoulder to underbust, and I'll go ahead to mark the shoulder to waistline. So I'm making this dress for another person, so the measurement I'm using is not my measurements. So now I'll place my ruler and I'm going to draw out a straight line, label it as shoulder to bust, underbust and waistline. Now I'm going to mark the shoulder divided by 2. Because we're attaching sleeve, I'll add ½ inch, come down by 1 inch at that point. So after doing that, I'll go ahead to mark the neckline. I'll be using the basic neckline of 3 by 3 inches, but when I was cutting it down, I went down a bit, so I used 3 inches by 3.5. So the depth of the neckline is 3.5. Now I'll connect down to my shoulder this way. So now next is to find the chest line. To find the chest line is the bust circumference divided by 6 plus 1.5 inches. So now I'll go ahead to mark. So also whatever I have here, I'll measure it so that I'm going to have a straight line at this point, and after that I'm just going to go ahead and connect. So that will be my chest line. So whatever I have at the shoulder, I'll go ahead to mark it on my chest line. Go ahead, place my ruler, and I'll draw a straight line. After this, I'm going to go ahead to divide this into 2, place my tape, fold it up this way, and I'll mark the middle of my armhole, come in by half. And now I'm going to mark my bust circumference divided by 4, which will serve as a guide for the armhole. Place my French curve, connect to the middle of the armhole, and go ahead to connect it to the shoulder. So now I'll go ahead to outline my pattern, and this is what I have. So next step I'm going to take is to go ahead to mark the nipple to nipple divided by 2. So I'm going to go ahead to mark it at the chest line, at the bust line, at the underbust, and at the waistline. So after doing that, I'll go ahead and rule a straight line at this point. So after ruling a straight line at the shoulder, I'm going to divide it into 2 by folding my tape, and I'll mark. So I'll connect that down to the chest line. So this will serve as a guideline when I'm marking out my darts at the upper part. Now I'm going to be taking a dart intake of 1 inch at both sides. For a plus size, go ahead and mark 1.5 inches at both sides. Now I'm going to go ahead to place my ruler, connect it upwards, and I'll do the same thing for this side. So after I'm done, I went ahead to mark it out with my ruler. Now I'm going to place my French curve, touching my bust down to my underbust, and on the other side I'm going to place connecting from my bust down to my other bust. So this is what I have. So from the chest line, I'll be going up by 2 inches. So this totally depends on you, if you want to review your cleavage or if you don't want. So I'll just rule a line that will serve as a guide at that point. Now I'm going to come up by 1 inch from my underbust. Now also, if you want yours not to be too revealing, you can go ahead to just go up more. Now I'll be marking a 1 inch dart at the upper part. So if you're a plus size, you'll be marking 1.5 inches or more. Now I'll place my French curve, and I'll go ahead to connect from the underbust down to the 2 inches I came up with. After that, I'm just going to use a freehand sketch to connect down to the upper part. Now you can also use your French curve if you want to, but I really want to get the shape I want at that point. So after marking it out, I'm going to use my marker to outline it, and this is what I have at this point. So now these 2 inches we have on this point, I'm going to replace it so that the yoke will match the bodies of the dress. So at this point, I'll just blend the upper part, and I'm going to use my marker to outline it out. So after I'm done outlining it, the next step I'm going to take is just to go ahead to replace my armhole. Now we'll be creating a new armhole for the dress. Go ahead and place your French curve, and I'm going to draw out. So I'll go ahead and connect what we have here, and I'll give it a little slant. So the next step is to insert the body measurement. So I'm going to mark the bust circumference divided by 4, measure the 2 inches that intake we have. I'll go ahead and replace it, and after that I'll be adding my sewing allowance. Now I extended the line we have at that point because it did not reach. I'm going to mark the underbust circumference divided by 4, measure the 2 inches that intake, replace it, and I'll add a 2 inches sewing allowance. Now I'll also extend the line at that point at the waistline. So we are not snatching this particular dress. I'm just going to use the actual waist circumference divided by 4, measure the dart intake, and add 2 inches sewing allowance to that. So I'll go ahead to connect from the waist down to the underbust, and from the underbust down to the chest line. Now this is what I have, and I will go ahead to outline it out. So you notice at the lower part of the waistline there's a little slant, so I'm just going to go down by 1 inch. There's nothing much at this point, and I'm just going to connect. So this is not really like a basque, it's just to give the waist a slant. So now to convert this bustier to an underbust corset, all you have to do is just to go ahead to rule a line across your underbust this way. So this is what I have at this point, and the next step is just to go ahead to cut out my pattern. And while cutting it out, I'm going to go ahead to label it so that I don't misplace one pattern for the other part. So at this point, if you find this tutorial very interesting and educative, please don't forget to hit on the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up. So after cutting out my pattern, this is what I have. So this is my underbust corset. So if you have any question concerning this, please leave it at the comment section. So now we'll be moving over to the back pattern. So on my back pattern, I've gone ahead to mark out all my basic measurement just like we did in front. The neckline, I used 3 by 2 inches, but for the front I used 3 by 3. Now I added 2 inches zipper allowance to the pattern. So I marked out the back pattern just like we did for the front. The only difference is the zipper allowance. Now I'm going to mark the dart, which is the shoulder to bust line plus 1 inch. So the shoulder to bust line I'm working with is 9.5 plus 1. I have 10.5 inch. I'm going to mark the nipple to nipple divided by 2, starting from the zipper allowance. So after marking that, I'm just going to go ahead to place my ruler, and I'm going to connect and rule a straight line. So I'm just going to mark out this point because that is where the dart is going to start. You can also go ahead to extend your dart if you're going to cut out this pattern, so from the chest line, but we're going to be using one piece for the back. So I went ahead to mark 1/2 inch on both sides, and I connected it upwards to that point. So this is my dart intake. So after that, I'm just going to go ahead to outline my pattern so that it's going to be very visible. So the next step is just to go ahead to mark my body circumference, and all my measurement is starting from the zipper allowance. I'll mark the bust circumference divided by 4, measure the sewing allowance, add it, that is 2 inches. So at the underbust, so there's no underbust at the back, but we are making reference with the underbust in front. So mark your underbust circumference divided by 4, measure the little dart intake, and I will add the sewing allowance of 2 inches. At the waistline, I'm going to mark the waist circumference divided by 4, measure the dart intake we have at that point, and you're going to go ahead to replace it, which should be 1 inch because we marked half on both sides. After that, I'll mark 2 inches. Now I'm going to connect from the waistline, down to the underbust, and from the underbust down to the bust line, or from the bust to the underbust, and from the bust to the waistline. So after this, the next step is to go ahead to get rid of the bulginess. So I'll go ahead and measure 1/2 inch, and I'm going to go ahead to extend it upwards down to my pattern on top, just to get rid of the bulginess at the back of the dress. Now I'm just going to go ahead to cut out my pattern, and on the upper part of this dress, I'm going to mark out the chest line. So I want to create like a little keyhole neckline at the back so, but we are not going to cut out this pattern into two, just a little keyhole at the back. So after marking it out this way, I'm just going to use my marker to blend it out very well, and I'm going to go ahead to outline the chest area this way. So on the upper part is not going to be having a zip, we are just going to use a button or a loop on the upper part, just like we do in our normal pattern, but the only difference with this is that we have just one piece for the back pattern of the dress. So moving to the lower part, which is the skirt pattern, for an A-line skirt, so you can go ahead to fold with 18 inches, and if you want more flay at the lower part, you can use more than that. So for our skirts, we are going to start where we stopped on our dress. So we stopped at 18 inches, which is the waistline. So, and the total length of the skirt the dress I'm making is 62 inches plus 2 inches for folding allowance, which leaves me at 64 inches, right? So now this is what I have at this point, and then going over to the upper part, I'm going to place my tape and I'll mark the hip point. So I'm using 8 inches because the person I'm working on the dress for is much taller. So now I'm going to get the waist to knee point, and the waist to knee point is 22 inches. So from that point I will be going up by 2 inches. So why am I doing this? Is just to give the dress a fitted effect from the knee part. So after I'm done marking this, I'm just going to go ahead to start inserting the measurements on the dress. So I'll go ahead and mark the waist circumference divided by 4, add the 2 inches sewing allowance. So when I'm sewing a bustier or a corset, I don't add that to my skirt, but if you do add that, go ahead to mark your that at this point. Now at the hip line, I'm going to mark the hip circumference divided by 4, go ahead to add 2 inches for the sewing allowance. So now I'm going to connect from the hip down to the waistline, or from the waistline down to the hip. So after I'm done doing this, the next step is to mark your measurements at the lower part, which is at that knee part. So whatever you have on the hip, I'll be minusing 2 inches from that point. So if you don't want it to be more fitted, go ahead to take out 1.5. So for example, if your hip is 40 divided by 4, you have 10 plus 2 inches, that's 12 and 12 inches. So when you're marking at the knee point, you're going to go ahead to take out 2 inches, which will give you back 10 inches. So this is what I did at that point. So from the hip line, connect to that point that you took out 2 inches from. So now we are going to connect from that point down to the lower part of the skirt, that is the length of the skirt. You can go ahead to slant this, or you can make use of your long ruler if you want to. So after connecting mine, this is what I have for my skirt. So on the thumbnail, the picture of the skirt we have there is actually was achieved from cut and spread or cut and slash method. So now, without wasting much time, I'm just going to go ahead to cut out my skirt. So if you have any question concerning this particular tutorial, please leave your question at the comment section. So after cutting out my skirt, this is what I have, and the A-line I have here is not that much. Just like I said, if you want to achieve what we have on the thumbnail, it is actually a cut and spread method, but this is someone's dress that I'm making, so the person doesn't want that particular A-line on her dress. So moving to the back pattern of the dress, I've gone ahead to place the first part, that is the front part, on the back pattern, and I added 2 inches for zipper allowance. So to add tail to the lower part of this dress, I'm going to go ahead to measure about 10 inches from the center, which is the middle part, the part going towards the zipper. So I'm going to place my tape from the lower part of the skirt and I will measure 10 inches. So I don't know if you understand what I'm saying, because there's too much pattern on this dress and it's very difficult to even see it. But from the zipper parts of the dress, you're going to add 10 inches, 5 inches, 15, depending on how long you want the tail to be. And I'm just going to go ahead to connect it upwards down to the other end of the dress. So by the time I'm done cutting out, you're going to understand what I'm actually saying. So now I'm going to go ahead to cut out my pattern. So if you don't really understand this part, I also have a video on where I made a mermaid skirt. You can go ahead to check it out on my channel. It is more visible because the dress there doesn't have a lot of pattern. So now after cutting out, this is what I meant by adding 10 inches or 15 inches to the lower part to create tail on your dress. Now I'm going to slit the zipper part of my dress, and if you notice that the tail is at that part. So with this, we have come to the end of today's tutorial. Please don't forget to join us on the sewing part of this video, and if you haven't yet subscribed, please hit on the subscribe button. Thanks.